Hey guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we have another common misconceptions episode. So since the last time, we've had a few great discussions with friends, clients, and colleagues on these topics. So today, expect to learn about specificity. Can you get better by doing other things? We're going to talk about season planning and how seasons can and should look, ab training and a common misconception or mistake there, and also progressions and regressions and a common mistake that people tend to make with advanced movements. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsors, thetrainingstimulus.com. Please check it out if you're interested in learning more about movement mechanics. wit-fitness.com. Please use discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase. And Hydro, please use discount code LL20 to get 20% off your blood flow restriction apparel. Rob, more misconceptions.
Yeah, mate. So the first one, you're telling me that if I want to get better at CrossFit, I should swim.
Yep. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, swimming is part of CrossFit, isn't it? So
Technically, yeah, I shouldn't have used CrossFit. I should say powerlifting. If I want to get better at powerlifting, I can put down the barbell and just go and play golf.
yeah, exactly. So this one is around specificity, and it comes from a conversation I had with an athlete recently, and he made a comment basically saying that a good program is one where you don't snatch for 4 weeks and then you PB your snatch because all the other stuff has made you better at snatching. And I bit my tongue because I didn't have time to go off and want to say everything I wanted to say to him. So I'll send in this episode. But this is something we talk about often on the podcast around specificity and this notion that it's better to get good at something by doing other things. I think is pervasive in CrossFit that, you know, if your program's really rounded, then it almost doesn't matter that you're not touching specific skills. But the principle of specificity is that specifically practicing something is the best way to get good at it. The brain learns through skill and motor patterns, which are in relation to the core movement pattern that you're trying to improve. However, I think where this gets confusing is that particularly with beginners, you will see a lot of carryover benefit. Like if you have never lifted in your life and you deadlift, your squat will probably go up. Your pull-ups might even go up compared to what they were because your base is so low. And an analogy I like to use to describe this is for a child who's done no sport, if they play baseball and then they go and try golf, they'll probably be better at golf than a child that's done neither, because there is some similarity in that there's hand-eye coordination, there's rotation, and you're hitting a ball. So because they've gone from a base of 0 to something, they will be better than the child who's completely untrained. However, a PGA Tour professional golfer will not improve their golf by playing baseball, because the level of specificity required to improve their golf swing is so high because they're already so proficient. They're thinking about how shallow their swing arc is, the swing path, the club face on impact, these like extremely intricate details. So doing something so dissimilar as a baseball swing isn't going to improve that skill and that motor pattern. So it is, again, one of these big caveated, it depends on how experienced you are, how good you are already at something. But the falsity is that there isn't something better about improving a skill through doing other things. If you want to get good at something, you have to do that thing. And that thing might be mixed modal fitness. So you can only get good at doing WODs. You can only get as good as you could be doing WODs if you do WODs. Doing all the skills in isolation is different to doing all the skills together. So that's another reason the waters get a little bit muddied, because the skill of doing metcons and mixed modal fitness is a skill in itself, and it's distinct from doing the movements in isolation. So you can be really good at wall balls on their own, but when you throw it with something else, the skill under fatigue is almost a separate skill. You can be really good at weightlifting when you're fresh, but when you throw it into a workout, it's a completely different situation. So I can see why there's confusion around this, but I think it just bears saying that the more skilled you are, the more specific you need to be to continue to make progress.
I think, as you say, like it got muddy in the waters here when basically CrossFit come around and started saying you should do these basically workouts of the day, which are just going to improve you overall across the board, kind of like what you were saying there. And I think when that statement was kind of stated, because then you look at, say, elite CrossFitters and you see like these absolute animals that are super fit, super strong, like, you know, and they look great. You're like, so it must be the way. But then when you break down their training and you see that they're doing the same stuff week in and week out, day in, day out, you know, always, and they're also spending they break their days up into multiple sessions so they can have a sole focus on weightlifting, a sole focus on maybe some accessory work, and then a sole focus on conditioning. So like they're actually bringing stuff all together, say potentially say at the end of the day or whatever. And it's like, for me, it's like the higher up you go in the level of like beginner to elite, it is the thing of you need to specify even more because you're looking for the smaller wins rather than the bigger wins. So it's like with that guy, with that athlete you're talking to who said about his snatch, is like if he just about snatches say 40 kilos, he probably will get a lot stronger a lot quicker by doing, say, an overhead squat and like, and say not touching a snatch again and doing all these other things, some jerks and stuff, just by having a stronger overhead position. So he's just more stable. So actually, when he uses his more legs, he actually can stabilize more weight overhead. So if he was a lot further down a lot earlier on in his journey, but as soon as you get later on in your journey, it's in like, I've even finding that now, like with my powerlifting, it's like I have to make sure I'm doing the main lifts. Otherwise, I'm not going to get better at them. Because even though I know how to deadlift and stuff, I need to expose my body to the heavier loads to be able to sustain those heavier loads so that I can actually increase by, say, 2.5, 5 kilos or whatever that is down the line. Because I'm not just suddenly going to be stronger if I then go and do, as I joked about at the start, go and do some swimming. It's like my body might move better. I might feel great. But will it improve my top end lift? Most likely not, because I have a good enough position for my 3 main lifts. So mobility isn't an issue. It's more of a strength thing, which is then something which is going to be learning that skill and nailing it over and over again, which is boring for most people. Yeah, but it's the essential part in progression.
Yeah, spot on. And I think, you know, people think if you did DT, your deadlift will improve.
Yeah.
Like for you, for somebody who has a poor deadlift or is relatively early in the training career, their 1 rep max deadlift might improve if they do DT every week. But you could do DT forever and your 1 rep max deadlift won't go up. No. So far below your 1 rep max. And yeah, I think it's just getting a good understanding of that can just mean you focus your training so much more sharply and you'll get better results.
Yeah. So I think this leads quite nicely on because since we're talking about kind of how things are laid out, and it's talking about season plans, and common misconceptions is off season equals strength and off season equals just some strict gymnastics, especially within the CrossFit world. So like you got just your barbell heavy work, you know, you're not going to do a snatch, you'll do a snatch pull. Like you're going to only do your snatch pulls, then you're going to do your squats, and then you're going to do strict gymnastics. Surely then is that what your weakness is? Is that what you're trying to do in your off season?
Yeah, exactly. So I think this one transcends just CrossFit even into like marathon planning and things like that, where there's like a generally accepted wisdom that there's a best sequence with which to pursue the various different aspects of fitness you want to work on. So in CrossFit, like Rob said there, people think that in the off season you want to be developing your strict strength. In gymnastics you want to be working on your raw strength, the power lifts. You want to be building an aerobic base, doing long steady state cardio. In the marathon, similarly, you'd be doing lots of like volume accumulation at low intensity. And to be clear, we're absolutely not saying that that's wrong and that isn't beneficial for a lot of people. But what we are saying is we need to add a lot of room for nuance, because depending on what sort of athlete we're dealing with, that could be totally incorrect. So the examples would be in CrossFit. If somebody already has phenomenal barbell strength like in the power lift and already has phenomenal strict gymnastics, actually for their season to yield best results going into the next competition time, they would benefit more by spending more time on the kipping movements, the Olympic lifts, maybe higher intensity workouts because they've got a good aerobic base already. So there's nothing wrong with reorganizing the sequence with which you attack them. And maybe they need a whole year of kipping to improve their gymnastics efficiency, and the strict strength isn't a limiter. Equally, for a runner, if their aerobic base is phenomenal already, and actually it's their tolerance for the high intensity. And check out the episode we did with Luke Hall on VO2 max and using the Moxie monitor to get a better understanding of the bioenergetics and what's actually limiting your cardiovascular output. If you're a runner, and you might know somebody like this where they're struggling to get their 5K time down, and they can absolutely end themselves, finish the 5K, and then they're recovered in like a minute because they literally aren't fast enough to dig any deeper. Or the other thing you'd see with these sorts of runners is they go out and their 800 pace around the track would be the same as their 400 pace around the track. They actually can't go
Yeah.
faster. For that person to actually improve in the off season, they should be working on power and speed rather than just the aerobic base, because that aerobic base training is taking away time that could be used to develop the actual limiter to their performance. So this notion that season plans should follow a standard order because of, strength takes longer to develop, aerobic base takes longer to develop, that can be true for some people, but that doesn't mean it's the thing that's actually holding back their performance most. So individuals will benefit more by starting on the weakness and spending more time in the season on the weakness by the time competition time comes around. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for me. It's because I think the standard template of strength and strict work, say in the off season, it follows a progression which you can kind of understand of like slow building up to something fast. So we understand that, and we always hear like the hair in the tortoise and that kind of thing. Like it is sometimes about steady, then building up intensity, and we're all about that because obviously then the competition or the peak of the season is normally extremely fast paced and just all systems going. You are trying to build yourself towards that. However, if you're finding that you're quickly breaking down in, say, using CrossFit again, so say you're doing pull-ups and your shoulder endurance is just absolute pony, and it's like you've got really good body positions, you know the skill of it, you just haven't got the endurance. That's what, don't save that for like 12 weeks out from your first competition to then start building that skill. It's like, for me, this is where I would say a lot of my off-season plans were wrong back in my CrossFit time. Not that I went to any high level or anything, but it was the off-season it was after the open. Right, now let's get strong. It's like, I'm already strong. It's like, I should be building my endurance, my capacity, my abilities to sustain threshold. And and that's the thing. It's like, but I don't look back and regret anything like that, because it is what it is. I built more strength, which then made me a stronger athlete in the long run. So, because that is more of what I prefer. So it just biased more what I enjoyed more, and I never really got really good at what I was shit at. I just got good. So again, it's how you approach it off season for if you want a specific plan compared to a general plan.
Yeah, I think that's right. And the other thing that I've just thought of now is that there's also some generally accepted wisdom around the sequence with which you should pursue various fitness traits. So strength should precede power, should precede whatever else. And there is of truth to that, but something we always say at the training centers is that everything is everything. So even if you're developing power, there be an element of strength in it. You can never fully separate any of these movement qualities or fitness characteristics. So a great example of this is jumpers are incredibly strong naturally, even if they haven't done much gym work, because they're doing so much power work. they've actually developed a huge amount first. And like kids who do jumping sports come into the gym and they're already very strong. So what's going on? Like they do much power and explosive stuff, but they've got strong. So
Yeah.
we can't fully separate fitness characteristics. There's always going to be an element of crossover, and provided the level you're training at is appropriate for where you are, there is no wrong order. Like if you are training power work, which is appropriate for where your body is at the moment, it doesn't have to be preceded by a strength block. You
Yeah.
can just train low level power. Your body will adapt to that and you'll actually get stronger at the same time. So I think I just want to challenge that notion that you always have to do a strength block before you do a power block. If you're if you're already strong, just doing back might be the most efficient way to improve your overall performance.
Yeah, I think planning the season, when we talk about the off season, also just that little bit right before you get into competition, where we're then talking about the peaking. Like everyone is going to have a different peaking strategy because some people are going to feel better. Like generally, I think most people would think the more rested you are, the better you're going to be. Whereas for most athletes, they know they need to be a little bit sore, because if they're a little bit sore but not too sore, they're going to be able to perform because they're maintaining tension in their body and everything. It's like, for me, it's like my last powerlifting competition, I think I did relatively well. Even though I trained not that much, I was building a gym. So I was physically picking stuff up, moving stuff. I was doing so much movement right up towards, say, the end of my prep. That is, my body had all this tension, but it was relatively rested because I was still hitting my fundamentals. I was still kind of hitting my top numbers. But outside of that, it was just kind of more general movement. So then that would make no sense to someone who's like, right, I'm going to be tapering down everything, making sure everything's peaking just right into the competition where I can then perform my best. Whereas so not saying that I need to build a gym in between all my preps, but I'm just saying is in like, that was that goes against what you'd normally think.
Exactly. I think we've spoken about this maybe at some point in the past, where I think a classic competition is over tapering, so reducing your volume too much. And if you think about that from a training perspective, you're on a down, you're not on an up. So your body is actually ramping things down. So if it's a fitness like cardiovascular endeavor, you'll actually start to reduce your blood volume. So you have literally less blood to carry less oxygen to perform your race with. If it's a strength sport, then your muscles are starting to relax and starting to lose the tension, which creates the contractions, which actually move the weight. And this is another one which is caveated around the type of athlete, but particularly those who tend towards being hypermobile. Being a bit stiff, having tension in muscles is generally how people perform best. So if you're the sort of athlete who PBs during an EMOM rather than long rest between sets, this might be you. And going into a competition with a week of training each lift once, you're probably going to feel almost too loose, too relaxed, and you're going to struggle to stabilize your positions. You're going to struggle to put force into the bar as well, as if you'd actually almost trained as normal going into the competition, because that's what your body's used to. It's then in a rhythm, it's in good form, and your technique and your skills are sharp. So I'd always rather somebody goes in form, but a little bit sore, a little bit tired, than fresh, loose, and weak, which is not conducive to a peak performance.
No. So I think going into our next point of using the hardest variation you can. And so this one for me kind of leads off of the off-season plan, because it's, for me, when someone has they've achieved their muscle ups, or they've achieved the ability to do a pistol, they forget about the fundamentals that have brought them to the muscle up. So they're like, right, I've now got my first muscle up, so now that is everything. Or I can do, say, a set of 3 muscle ups. I am now only going to do muscle ups to get better at muscle ups. It's like, no, you need to think about it, break that down. Like, look at your muscle up now. Okay, so you can do 3, great. What is the limiter that stops you doing 4? Like, what is that point? Now let's train that. So then you bring back in things like your kip swings and stuff. Like it's and I'm culprit. Like we touched on it the other episode where it said about when was the last time you did a perfect air squat. Like when was that? When have you regressed your movements back far enough to go, right, I need to nail this a bit better, and I'm going to quickly progress right back up. But I'm going to really nail those foundations again to make sure my foundation is sturdy enough to keep increasing the capacity of the top end stuff.
Yeah, spot on. I think it's a really classic tick the box so you think you never need to go back. It's where there are these, and people think that once they've done them, they never need to do the fundamentals, exactly like you said. And it links back to an episode we did on limiters and understanding what's actually holding back your progress and stopping you move forwards. And the muscle ups, I'm going to do a little personal story here in that when I was trying to get my strict muscle ups up, I didn't just hammer strict muscle ups. Sure, they formed like a big part of my program, and getting good at the skill, as we touched on before, is super important. So doing the specific work of just strict muscle ups and trying to improve the reps and the total volume. But I would look at my strict muscle ups, and if I did a max set, why couldn't I do another one? So what's actually the limiter for my strict muscle ups? Because that's the thing that I need to work on more. And me, like pretty much everybody else in strict muscle ups, the limiter was transition strength. I could do a lot more strict ring pull-ups and a lot more strict ring dips than I could do muscle ups. So it's the gap between which was preventing me doing more strict muscle ups. So the main accessory movements for my muscle ups were transition drills, foot supported on the low rings, lots of different variations there to just develop the capacity to transition more. And if you improve the number of transitions you do, chances are you're going to tap into a higher number of strict muscle ups as well, because that's the only thing stopping you going back. So combining the understanding of what your limiter is with smart selection of regressions to focus on it, that's actually a much more robust plan to improve your performance than just I could keep doing lots and lots of muscle ups, but my volume is going to be limited. Say I could do, I don't know, 30 muscle ups, 30 strict muscle ups in a session. I could do 30 strict muscle ups and then could probably do another, I don't know, 20, 30 transitions as well. I'm
Yeah.
actually getting a lot more more volume into the limiter, because in 30 muscle ups, there's only 30 transitions. And then I could also do strict pull ups, strict ring dips to a greater volume than I could do if
Yeah.
I just did strict muscle ups. So if you're really trying to improve a movement holistically, do an important thing, easing out the individual component movement so that they can level up in isolation can allow you to unlock greater performance.
Yeah, and it's like it's same as like with strength as well. It's like it's when you have to lift heavy to be able to lift heavy. You can't do all this skillful technical stuff at the
Yep.
bottom end and not ever expect it. So like when Ash was saying there about he still needs to do the strict muscle ups. You still need to have the condition to do the full movement. Then when it comes the same with strength, you have to be able to have the capacity to take that much stress on the body. You have to know what it feels like to brace, which is where, where you do exercises where you can like heavy walkouts, block pulls, where you're going above and beyond what you're capable of so that you can increase. So it's not always about then regressing things back. It can sometimes be progressing things up, like when Ash said there, but also increasing the volume of the movements when it's broken down. Just shows you massively progressing the regression. So
Yeah. Yeah, so that just reminds me of when Andre Houdet came on the podcast, and he was talking about how he adapts his sessions sometimes. And he actually used it in the context of if he's feeling a little niggle, if the movement's not feeling quite right, he might substitute the main movement for a similar movement to achieve the same training stimulus. But if you know what the training stimulus is, you might actually achieve it better through a regression. So he was talking about pull-ups and ring rows as well. And if you want to improve, say, pull endurance, you could probably do a much higher volume and a longer duration of set by doing easy ring rows than doing strict pull ups.
Mm.
So it's almost, you can almost think of it as like zone two work for strength,
Yeah.
in that the intensity is so low, you can actually work for a longer period of time. You're using the same muscles in a similar movement pattern, but you can actually get a more specific training stimulus for what you're looking to improve. So the same goes for stuff like handstand walks or strict handstand push-ups. You'll be able to achieve a certain distance or a certain number of reps in those two movements, but you'll definitely be able to do more time under tension if you do a scaled version. So if you do like around the worlds on box pike handstand
Mm.
walks, or if you do box pike handstand push-ups, you'll actually be able to go for longer and produce higher numbers, which for the stimulus of improving shoulder endurance
Yeah.
would actually get you further than just tapping out after, say, 3 strict handstand push-ups. If you can do 10 box pike, or even if you do a superset from strict to box pike, which I sometimes prescribe, you get the best of both.
Nice. Really nice, mate. So lastly, a bit more of a fun one, as in like you should always basically do crunches to train your abs, or always do a form of like sit-ups, always basically making the distance between, say, your knees and your chest shorter.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think, I don't know how it started. I think just because sit ups are like the classic ab exercise, but I think of this as training your abs short. So we're always
Mm.
trying to flex our spine, bring a bottom rib to our pelvis. And that's what ab exercises look like. You've got, yeah, sit ups, crunches, dead bugs, hollows, L sits. All of these exercises just focus on going from neutral to short in the abs. And that does have some benefit,
Mm.
but the massive missing piece here is that a lot of movements, a lot of sports, a lot of skills involve the abs lengthened and the spine being extended.
Yeah.
So we're actually missing a huge range of motion, and that can not only increase your chance of injury but also reduce your performance. Like any overhead movement, you're going to be in some spinal extension, hopefully. Even in running, your abs are going to be in extension on the back leg
Yeah.
side. When you kip swing, when you go into the arch position, your abs need to be long. And the classic sort of arch on the floor or Superman position, you're actually training your back rather than training the abs in
Yeah.
that lengthened state. Um, so there's so many examples where we can see where the abs want to be or where they are in sport or in function, but we very rarely replicate that in the gym. And there's a huge piece here where not only do we train the muscles and reduce their range of motion so that they stay shorter, we actually reduce our ability to activate them. So one of the things we talk about a lot at the training center is basically lengthen to strengthen. So we need to get the abs long so they get maximally activated. And ironically, they'll
Mm.
actually get even better at shortening if you
Yeah.
do that. So if you can't get your abs long, you're actually missing out on their potential for maximum compression and maximum shortness. So doing those lengthened movements will actually improve your L sits. You obviously still need to do the L sits according
Yep.
to our specificity, but we get the carryover into the movements where the spine is extended and the abs are long, as well as getting some benefit for the shortened state through activation.
I think it's just because training your abs in a lengthened position is quite a hard thing to do. I think that's why, and it's mainly when I say hard, it's not necessarily just it's challenging, but it's also the access. Like a GHD, like how many people have a GHD? I know you can make your own versions and stuff like that, but generally, it's just another barrier of entry. Whereas
Yeah.
you can nearly always do everything through when you're trying to make them shorter yourself at home easily.
Well, I think the other thing that goes alongside this is the notion that it's dangerous, it's
Yeah.
bad for your back to extend your back. So if you think about how planks are typically taught, tuck your tailbone under, flatten your back, it's air quotes bad to let your hips sag. But actually, hip sagging, they're doing that because they're looking for length through your abs.
Mm.
So there's a movement I sometimes prescribe for people who need more of this called a floor hump, where you just go from a push-up position and drop your abs towards the floor, eyes up to this, almost like an up dog in
Yeah.
yoga. So you're getting into that length through the abs and then returning back out towards plank or even beyond into a down dog. The other one that I like to use a lot is what I call a ring rollout, and it's kind of like an ab rollout but using the low rings. So you push out and you replicate an arch position in kipping. The hips go forward into the arch, but because you're facing forwards, as you're not lying on the ground like you are in an arch hold,
Yeah.
the weight is actually in your abs rather than
Yeah.
in your back. So you get that length through the anterior chain. So you'll get a seriously good. A lot of people are very sore through the abs the next day because they're not used to that length, and there is a significant amount of load going through them if you set it up right.
Nice. I love it, mate. Really, really good. So, guys, we really hope you got a lot from today. And, you know, again, if you've got any more questions that we can do some more of these common misconception episodes, we'd love to hear them. Head over to @lunge.lift and send us a message, and we'll be sure to hopefully throw it into a later episode. So, as always, thank you very much for your time. If you do want to leave us a review, we would happily take one. You know, you can go over to Apple Podcasts, go to Spotify, wherever you're listening to it, or even on YouTube. You can subscribe and support the podcast that way. But as always, thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.